Hello, everybody, and welcome into the most recent edition of the Odds and Audibles podcast. I am your host, Jared Mack, and with me is Erik Skopil. And today, we will be going over the Oregon's offensive two deep. If you missed last episode, we went over the defensive two deep, where Erik was in charge and he was the host, and I talked about the defense because that's my job. Here we are, reverse roles. I am the host. I am in charge. Look at me. I am the captain now, and Erik will be talking about the offense because that is his job. So, Erik, I think we'll just kind of jump right into it. It's going to be very similar if you listen to the last podcast of, the same idea of what we were doing. So I figured we just jump into it. I don't think there's too much to kind of discuss, and let's just go for it. So quarterback, heard there was a change over the offseason at quarterback. As I'm sure the listeners know, Bo Nix finally out of college eligibility at the age of 76, 12th overall draft pick by the Denver Broncos. Now moves on to the next level. Ty Thompson, the presumed backup last season, hits the transfer portal, goes to Tulane. Austin Novosad, the other scholarship quarterback on the roster last season, comes back for his second year under Will Stein and under Dan Lanning. So Oregon has to go out and get some new quarterbacks. So Erik, why don't you jump in and kind of tell me the quarterbacks and tell me where you have them in the depth chart?
Thank you, Jared. Hey, look, this hosting thing, it's pretty easy, right? That wasn't bad at all.
I'm a great host. It's a shame I don't get to do it more often, but here we are. We're doing it today.
You're in box number one, and maybe we'll keep you there. No, I think this is really fun, the quarterback situation. I think most listeners are obviously aware of the dudes, but we'll just run through it. Obviously, Dylan Gabriel, Dante Moore brought those guys in through the portal, signed, I think, a project quarterback in Luke Moga, which is probably the right kind of approach this year because you've got three guys ahead of him who are clearly going to be ahead of him. So bringing a guy who's got some exciting athletic intangibles with Moga, who I think he ran like a 10-6, 100 meters or something in high school, really fast, really athletic, but hasn't been playing the position too long. I think the developmental element there made a lot of sense, but kind of looking at the two deep here, Dan won't say it, but I think we kind of all know Dylan Gabriel's going to be the starting quarterback. In fact, I think,
are you sure?
Yeah. Well, I think didn't Will Stein? I don't know. When I was watching the spring game back a couple of times, I believe they said that Will told him basically Dylan Gabriel's the starting quarterback. So Dan might not say it, but Will might have said
water is wet. Yeah, the sun will rise in the morning. Yeah,
exactly. So that part isn't particularly compelling to me. And I thought Dylan had a good spring game, especially the second half. He kind of got it going. We talked about, I know on a recap pod, I think part of the reason he had a hard time in the first half was not totally his fault. It was a lot of the left side of that offensive line was a couple of young guys who just weren't ready and just got kind of embarrassed for a half. But they sort of settled in, and once that happened, he led a couple touchdown drives, had some nice throws. I thought he played well. I don't think there's any question. You said Bo Nix is 76. Dylan Gabriel is 75. If we're using that same math, they're basically the same age. They're old, a couple of old guys, veteran guys. He's done this forever. This is a 4-year starter who's becoming a 5th-year starter. So you know what you've got with Dylan Gabriel. What I came out of the spring game really interested by was Austin Novosad and Dante Moore. And I think we did in January, maybe we did our two deep, our first Oregon two deep predictions for 24. I think that's right. Something like that.
Probably January or February, either post bowl game or pre-spring football. I think that's when we did it, but there was not everybody who was on campus was on the list, but I think around that time was probably when we first did it.
And at that point I was just, let's put Dylan as a starter and Dante as the backup. Right. But I've now added Austin's name here, and I think I'm probably not the only one who feels that way. Even live, I felt like he made some of the better throws. But if you went and rewatched it, and full disclosure, it's been about a week since I've watched the game again. I'm going to plan on doing that a couple more times here, just because that's our only spring data point.
Right.
I thought Austin had maybe 3 or 4 of the just very best throws in that game. I was really impressed with him. I don't think we talked about it as much in the pod, but I wasn't sure I saw it. In the Fiesta Bowl, there were some kind of nice moments. He was kind of so thin, and just didn't really feel like it was. I don't know if I was sure he was ever going to be a guy. And coming out of the spring game, my opinion of him has changed enough I think this is really I don't know if it's a 50-50 split, but I think it's really an open competition and like legitimately one, not just like a coach speak. Yeah, these two guys are battling for it.
Right.
And so I've included them both there. I think that's the right way to do it. I think Austin has much higher upside than I thought, and the arm talent is much better than I'd expected. So, and that's not to take away from Dante, who also had some really nice moments. And if, again, we've talked about this before, if not for a couple of uncharacteristic like T-Ferg drops, like his stat line in his game probably looks a little different. Yep. But I think you have to be thrilled. You've got a sixth-year guy in Dylan who is ready to take over, ready for a last ride, about as experienced as any quarterback has ever been at this level. And then two young guys who I think both have, like, I know it's hard coming off of one, spring game, but like both have like actual Sunday aspirations and that could get there. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a reason, obviously, 100%. There's a reason Dante was ranked there, and Dylan or Austin, was another like top 150 recruit, and I'm way higher on him than I expected I would be coming out of that game. So I think it's a really great situation. And then of course you've got Moga developing in the background. I think Oregon is really set at the most important position in football, and I think the spring of 25 is going to be a blast trying to figure out how this all works, especially when you add Akili Smith Jr. into the fray. And shoot, who knows? Maybe they'll go hit another portal quarterback. I don't know what they'll do, but they are in a really good spot for both the short term and the long term, in my opinion, at quarterback.
I will play devil's advocate in favor of Dante Moore's spring game performance in a minute. However, as the host of the show, I must ask you another follow-up question to make sure this conversation sounds normal.
Yes.
What do you think about the possibility of redshirting Dante Moore and making it very apparent that Austin Novosad, who has already used a redshirt, is the number 2 going into the season?
We've talked about that. I think that's interesting in terms of preserving eligibility. But when I look at Dante Moore on the upside, I'm kind of going like, do you need to? Like, if this guy's as good as people think he is, like, he might be really just like a 4 and done, maybe, So I kind of lean like, just let the better player be the backup. And if Dante's clearly better than Austin, let him be the backup. Who cares about the red shirt rule? And frankly, like, if the season goes the way you're going, you might be able to preserve it anyway. I don't know, like, right, because they're going to be playing a lot of postseason games, which wouldn't count. But if it's a 50-50, maybe, and you have a conversation with Dante and he's like, yeah, I'm cool redshirting, because he did just play obviously at UCLA and didn't use his year. And if he signs off on it, like, I think that does make sense in terms of preserving eligibility. Like, if he understands that this could be a 5-year process for him in college, which I think he said when he committed 3 or 4 was kind of the plan, as I recall, because he had that big Sports Center commitment for Oregon a while ago. Obviously didn't end up signing, but so if he signs off on it, yeah, go for it. I mean, Austin's perfectly good enough, in my opinion, to be the number 2. So I think it just sort of comes down to what you think big picture, and probably more than anything, like, what Dante's cool with. Because if he's like, I'm going to be gone in 4 years, regardless of what you do with this year's red shirt, like, then just let him be the backup or don't use the red shirt. But if he's open for 5, I think that's a conversation you have, and maybe you go that route.
Fair enough. All right. My Dante Moore argument. So
go for it.
I thought Dante Moore was really good in the spring game, but people aren't going to care because he hit a lot of checkdowns. He went Bo Nix on everybody. And Austin Novosad may just be a different quarterback, but just in general, in terms of like, like the Brett Favre versus a Tom Brady argument, where it's clear Brett is just a gunslinger while Brady is going to, be more mechanical. I think that was kind of the situation, because Austin Novosad was just letting it loose. Yep. And sometimes that was great. There was a wonderful throw to Justice Lowe on the left sideline where he made a great catch. And I think his catch, or his throw, was to Jeremiah McClellan on the other side of the field, who made a great catch. He also threw a duck and got it intercepted by Dakota Fields into triple coverage. He also almost got another pass intercepted to Kenyon Sadiq over the middle, who was covered by Taisheem Johnson and Aaron Flowers. So I think he was just letting it rip. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I'm not trying to say this is Austin Novosad's performance was bad, because like you, I came out of there thinking, hey, this guy's much better than I thought he was going to be, just because I had no expectations of him. But I think Moore played well. I think he just took all the dump downs. I think a lot of the Jordan James receptions, who led both teams in them, were from Dante Moore just being like, well, our guys are covered. Oregon's secondary is pretty good, and I don't have the best weapons on the field, unlike the other guys. We're just gonna dump it off. Like, we're gonna get our yards, we're gonna get our chunk plays, and we're gonna keep moving the ball down the field. And I think that was good. I think that's not a bad thing to have. I think that's what Bo Nix excelled at so much last season. I think that's what Dylan Gabriel does really well at his age, at his position, and at his years of experience. So I think it was a good spring game just for everybody in the quarterback room. I still think Dante Moore is the better quarterback, and I don't really know if that's close. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing for Austin Novosad. I just think Moore is a better athlete, a better processor, has better arm strength when he can show it off. And, the experience matters. I know he stunk at UCLA last year, but it matters. I think there's a reason why, he was a top 10 high school recruit and a top 10 transfer portal recruit. I think he's the real deal. But I think what you ended off with in your original thoughts where, Oregon's really set up for the future. It's never been more apparent. And Luke Moga, like you talked about, full-on project, can't teach speed like that.
Nope.
So that could be a whole different type of offense if he, ever gets to the point where maybe Will Stein thinks he could get to, and maybe could run a lot of option or read options, stuff like that, and use his speed to break around the corner. But it's a lot of encouraging signs, to say the least, in the quarterback room. I just thought that Dante Moore deserves some. It's just not as flashy. He wasn't as flashy as a quarterback as everybody else was in the game, but he's still. And I'm not counting the dumb touchdown run at the end. I just thought he was still good at his job on that Saturday.
I love that you brought that up, because that was one of the things I wrote about in the aftermath was, what were some of the knocks on Dante at UCLA? It was sort of the decision-making, the processing, doing the things that you talked about that were bad from Austin's perspective of forcing the ball into windows that maybe you shouldn't be forcing them into. And yeah, I came away really impressed for the same reason of taking the check down, which of course is a thing that the NFL scouts apparently don't like, because Bo Nix got roasted for having like an 80% completion percentage where he just took the check down, because those are free yards, and sometimes free yards are better than forced yards or whatever. I thought the last drive of the first half for Dante was probably his best drive. I don't know if it ended in points. I can't recall because the game was a bit ago. But he took like 3 or 4 checkdowns to Jordan James, to it's been a minute since I've watched it, but Gary Bryant, I think, had a couple down the sideline, but just easy throws, like you're saying, that were the right decision. It weren't the flashy play. So yeah, I think good call bringing that up, because that was one of the things I came out impressed with. And who knows, maybe like Will was like, for you two guys, Austin, our issue with you is maybe you don't take enough risks. Go out there and take some risk. And hey, you did it and it worked. And maybe for Dante, it was, hey, maybe sometimes you take too many risks. Let's take the checkdowns. And hey, he went out and did it. And so that's hypothetical, but you could see an area where maybe Will kind of was telling both guys to kind of approach it a little differently. And if that's the case, or however you want to say it, I thought both guys succeeded in kind of proving some things that maybe I wasn't sure I'd see for both guys. So yeah, I think, again, quarterback room is very healthy right now.
Well, nearly 15 minutes in the quarterback room where there's a very clear starter. So you're welcome.
We're killing it, man. We're doing it.
We really are. Moving on to running backs, which might be the most different room that we have going into this upcoming season, at least on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, Bucky Irving was drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Great name, fit, alliteration, all the good stuff. 4th round. But the biggest move of the offseason in the running back room, probably Carlos Lachlan, running back coach for the past 2 years here at Oregon, decides to take the same position. I think he's an offensive assistant coach or some added title to his name at Ohio State, future Big Ten rival for Oregon. They'll meet up on October 12th in Eugene at Autzen Stadium. Could be one of the games of the season. But other additions, subtractions, Dante Dowdell hits the transfer portal, a 4-star recruit. Jordan James and Noah Whittington return. They add Jay Harris, who is a Division II Northwest
Missouri State,
right? Great. Northwest Missouri State Division II transfer who joins the team, had a great spring game.
Yeah.
They're still waiting for another running back to join during the summer, and they also bring back Jaden Lamar. So a talented room nonetheless, but there's additions, there's subtractions. Where do you see this one going, especially with Jordan James and Noah Whittington, two guys who have had a lot of experience at Oregon?
Well, because of Noah's inactivity in the spring game, and it was interesting because he did practice. He was at every practice we watched, like in spring.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, this is a guy who's clearly close, and I think for purely precautionary reasons, they just said, "We know what you are." I think Dan even kind of indicated that leading up to the spring game, like, "We know what you are. We don't need to have him go out there and prove it and possibly re-injure himself." So he didn't take part in the spring game. Maybe I'm in the minority. I just think Jordan James is the best running back on this team, and I have him as the starter. I don't have an or. I think there's probably some people saying it should be a Jordan or Noah. I get the argument. I'd be open to it. I wouldn't be surprised if it feels like more of a 50-50 split come fall than I'm indicating. But I think similar to the Bucky Jordan or the Bucky Noah backfields we've seen the last 2 years. Like, I think you're just going to come down to the point where when you need your best back on the field, it's going to be Jordan James. And I think he did everything in the spring game to prove he can be a feature back. Like you mentioned, leading the team in receptions, like that was an area that I wasn't totally sure what he was as a pass catcher. I think he had like 12 or 13 catches last year. Like it wasn't very many. And for him to catch 7, to look natural doing it was encouraging. Obviously, we know what he can do between the tackles. We know he's got that acceleration once he gets upfield. All of that's there. I think he's the complete, he's a complete back. And frankly, we'll see what he chooses to do and how good the season is. I'm not going to be surprised at all if this is a 3-and-done guy. If he decides to, hey, I've got, even if it's like a round 3 or 4 grade with the way running backs work in the NFL and the short lifespan, I could see him just being like, screw it. Let's just jump in there. I'm relatively healthy. Let's limit it. So I'm really high on Jordan James. I think Jared and I both are from our past conversations. So I've got him as a starter. I have a Noah and this was the other guy I was really impressed in the spring game, Jay Harris, the D2 transfer that Jared talked about from Northwest Missouri State. It's probably recency bias. I think Noah Whittington's the better running back. I think more than likely, assuming he's fully healthy, there will be a clear hierarchy of Jordan to Noah to Jay. But I came out of the spring game being like, they've got 3 pretty damn good guys. And the great part about it is 3 very different body types, 3 different types of runners. There's going to be some fun combinations for Rashad Samples to mess with and Will Stein to mess with. That's the cool thing, just looking at this all the skill positions, like running back, wide receiver, tight end. It's not just that they have a lot of depth. It's that they've got a really broad group of skill sets that they could, from a personal package perspective, work on. Of like, there could be completely different running backs, receivers, and tight ends, around the goal line than there would be on 3rd and long, like completely different 5 or 6 guys, just based upon the variety of skill sets. So I get really excited about that. But Jay was a menace out there. We talked about this several times, so I don't want to belabor it, but he made the true freshman Kamar look kind of goofy out there. And like he didn't even, so this is a guy I'm really high on. We'd heard awesome things about him leading into spring. I think everything we saw in the spring game and everything we heard about his spring prior to that was really positive. I think it's a 3-man rotation. This is what they've done in the past when it had 3 healthy running backs who are capable of it. Obviously, we know it was, Jordan James and maybe the Jay Harris role a couple of years ago. I think Jay is maybe your short yardage back. Or maybe Jordan's just so good you don't want to take him off the field around the goal line. I don't know, but I think there's going to be a role for Jay, and so I've included him as an or, while also acknowledging that if Noah had taken part in the spring game and it just looked like Noah Whittington again, I don't know if I would have included the or. But the reality is I haven't seen Noah Whittington in an Oregon uniform playing football since last September, so I don't know exactly what it looks like. So I'm kind of hedging the bet there. I really 100%. Like Noah. I really like Jay. I really like Jordan. Once again, Oregon is really deep and really talented at this position.
Yeah, I think that this is a incredibly deep position, and I don't have there's no disagreements here. I will say I think by the season start, I think Noah Whittington is the clear 2 with Jay Harris as the clear number 3. But I don't anticipate it's different than like a quarterback depth chart. Like I think any of these 3 guys could be on the field at the same time with any of the other 2 guys. So like Oregon, they ran a 21 personnel with Jay Harris as the lead blocker for, I don't remember who was the running back, but
that was sick, by the way. I'm all in for that. More of that.
So, I mean, they did that. They didn't do that as much last year, but 2 years ago when it was the Bucky Irving, the Noah Whittington backfield, they did that a lot, and they had Noah Whittington as the lead blocker. But without Whittington last season, it was Jordan James and Bucky Irving, and both those guys needed to work on their blocking skills. So that'll be one of the things I look forward to the most, to see where Jordan James is with that. But James specifically, he's the most talented dude in the room.
Yeah,
he's. I think he could be drafted much higher than Bucky Irving.
I agree.
I don't mean that in any, bad way to Bucky. We all love Bucky. Great running back, one of the better ones that Oregon has had in recent history. But I think James, with a full load of work, is going to raise some eyebrows. I just think that he's a monster. And I think that Harris and Whittington, behind him, is a great three-headed monster. And I also think Jalen Lamar is pretty good.
Yeah, thanks for saying that.
Like, I think
we haven't mentioned his name at all. We talked for 8 minutes about the position. He hasn't even come up.
Yeah, I think he's good. I think he's just going to have to wait his turn. I hate to say it, but Whittington is out of eligibility after the year, and Jordan James is probably going to be going pro. So next year in 2025, it'll look with Jay Harris and Jalen Lamar, and I think that'll be his opportunity to show what he's got. But I think he's a good running back. You saw him in little spurts last year, and he was always the first freshman off the bench, rather than Dante Dowdell, who was the higher rated one. So I think Oregon likes him a lot, and I think that he'll see his role increase this year. It's just going to be, he's going to, I don't know how many carries he got last season, but it's not like he's going to quintuple, or he might double his carries from last season, but
we'll see.
We'll see.
He had opportunity last year when they lost, and that when Noah went down, and he didn't really get thrown into it. Now you have three guys ahead of him. I think it's probably similar.
He'll probably, that's why I was saying, like, at most he's going to double.
Yeah,
and you would have to assume somebody has to get hurt in order for that to happen.
And then one last thing on running back is just that Noah Whittington, because he was hurt last year, technically has 2 years left. He's listed as a junior, which again, this COVID year, and then last year's a medical redshirt. I don't know what he'll do. Like, if I'm him, does he want to spend 6 years in college as a running back? Is that something you do? I think he just tried, because I think he could be like I don't know. He has a chance to, like, at least be on a practice squad and make a roster. I mean, he can make some money playing running back in the NFL, I think. So
right. Yeah, I agree. Still, the COVID rules, like you said, he should have 1 year left. He should have 0, but
whatever.
It is what it is. Anyways, moving on. We're going to the wide receivers, another group that had some guys leave, and some guys come in. Still, Junior Adams at the helm here with the wide receiving unit. Lost Troy Franklin, a 4th-round pick, to the Denver Broncos, teaming up with Bo Nix there in Denver. But they returned basically everybody else. Tez Johnson, Oregon's leading receiver in the Fiesta Bowl, who broke the program record in single season reception yards a season ago, who was just second to Troy Franklin, who broke the record for single season receiving yards. A guy who comes back, who could be a true number one. Gary Bryant Jr., Trayshawn Holden, Jurion Dickey, a talented true freshman. He returns. Kyler Casper, whole bunch of guys. And on top of it all, Oregon brings in a lot of talent in this room as well, specifically with 5-star transfer portal addition Evan Stewart, a guy who played 2 seasons at Texas A&M, who kind of had a lot of injuries to deal with, but when he was healthy, flashed a lot of potential there and flashed some potential in the spring game. Alongside them, they bring in Jeremiah McClellan, Ryan Pelham, and Dylan Gresham as 4-star wide receivers in the class of 2024. Very talented room. I feel like this is the cornerback equivalent. Just a lot of dudes with a lot of talent. Still didn't even mention a guy like Justice Lowe, who had a good spring game, who's, there's been a lot of talk about how he's performed this season, during the spring football season. So a lot of dudes. Let's get into it.
Can we just start by saying Junior Adams is like one of the best receivers coaches in the country, because they just reload and all these guys develop. Like, Troy got a lot better once, and maybe that's just a guy going from being a freshman when Junior arrived to being a sophomore and a junior, and there's that natural development. But all these guys just seem to get better. And even a guy like Tez going up from Troy to this level, like his production is never, I mean, he like outclassed his best year at a much lower level. I know part of that he was playing with his brother in a very pass happy offense with his brother happens to be like an incredible first round caliber quarterback. So there's some of that, but I just think everybody gets better. So I just wanted to shout out Junior because I think he's a really good position coach, and Oregon is very fortunate to have him. And this is a guy who I think at some point will probably be leading his own program as a head coach. I know he's on the record saying that's something he wants to do. Okay. This position, as you said, is sort of the cornerback equivalent. I think that's the right way to put it because there's a ton of guys. I don't necessarily know how it all fits. Even my two deep, I'll kind of hedge it and say I kind of am relying upon some of what we saw last year for the order, but like I almost feel like I know it's wrong. But that's just how it goes. So currently my starting three would be Evan Stewart at X, Gary Bryan at Z, Tez Johnson in the slot. Why do I think that's wrong? Well, those are three guys that are like sub 6 foot, and Oregon has a bunch of big athletic outside receivers that I think would probably be much better fits, assuming Tez and Evan are going to be your starters, which I mean, I came out of that spring game thinking those two guys are
not have them on the field.
Yeah, they're so freaking good. Evan Stewart is as advertised. I know there was like all of this weird A&M narratives coming from College Station that was kind of like, okay, like what's going on with this guy? And I got some of the like kind of he's got interesting vibes. I'll put it in his interview we had this spring with him.
I love East too.
Yeah, so there's a little first person stuff or third person stuff, and it's just kind of like okay, but on the field, oh my gosh, like he did some stuff out there, and Oregon just had Troy Franklin, who ended up being a 4th round pick, but was one of the most productive receivers probably the school's ever had.
Right,
this guy does some stuff that Troy can't do in terms of some of the movement skills, some of the catch radius stuff. Like even though he's, like I said, probably 5'11", like some of the stuff he was able to do, that touchdown catch. I know for audio listeners you're not seeing it, but where he just like pinned it against his shoulder pad through pretty heavy contact from Cam Alexander, and what was definitely a pass interference call. Like I'm thrilled that they have him. He's going to be really freaking fun to watch. And so, I went with Gary as a guy who started, I think, every game he was healthy for last year. I want to say he started 11 or 12 games last year. Tez is a lock, and we probably don't even talk enough about Tez because we know we know what he is, and he's probably he could break all of Troy's records this year. Who knows? Like if the pass offense is great, he might be able to do something like that. But I just think the Z is probably going to be a taller receiver. And I know this was the argument that people in the comments had with me before. I'll just say the reason I was so adamant about Gary being the starting Z was because he had started all these games last year as the starting Z, and it felt weird to just like jump a guy over him. It was also notable in the spring game that Gary basically played in the slot exclusively. And I think that's telling. I think that's where he fits. I think he's probably going to be more of like a hybrid X slot guy with some Z out there than just like the starting Z where he played almost exclusively last year. And I think that opens the door for one of Trayshawn Holden, Jurion Dickey, or Kyler Casper to take that spot. And Trayshawn would be, to me, the pick. So my depth chart, I actually have an or with Gary and Trayshawn at Z. I have Jurion or Casper as the backup X, and then I have Gary as the backup slot behind Tez. I think this room is a lot of fun. I'm not even mentioning Jeremiah McClellan, who had one of the 2 or 3 best catches of the game, or Justice Slow, who like none of us are really talking about. And then Tez Johnson says he's one of the team's 3 best receivers after the spring game. And I'm like, okay,
sure, yeah,
maybe, I guess. We only get to watch so much of practice. I just think this room is loaded. And kind of my final thought before I throw it over to you is that, I asked Will about the possibility of going to a larger receiver rotation. And on this podcast, we've said this a bunch, but first 2 years of Dan here and Junior here, like 90% of the reps at receiver went to 4 guys. Like they just played a 4-man rotation. That's really all it was. I think this is going to be more. I think you have to find a way to play more guys. You have to play. Honestly, I think 6 guys like is the minimum based upon the talent they have. Like, are you going to tell me you're not going to play Jurion Dickey like at all, and you're not going to play Kyler Casper at all? Like, I just don't think that's how this plays out. And so this is going to be a deeper room. I think it's as talented a room that they've had in a minute. And I once again, I know we keep saying it, this is a really, really loaded position group for the Ducks.
Yeah, I don't. I think the biggest thing that we could discuss here is the Gary Bryant spot, because you have to play Evan Stewart and you have to play Tez Johnson on the field, at least as the starters. Assuming they're all fully healthy. Blah blah blah. The Z receiver spot, I don't blame you at all for having Gary Bryant, because that's what he played last year. He was the Z receiver, and obviously they've added more talent, and guys have their second year in the program. They should get better. Blah blah blah. Maybe Gary Bryant's better. I don't know.
He was good in this. He had a good spring game. He wasn't bad.
Yeah. No, he wasn't bad. And, when he was healthy, he was actually a really important contributor to their offense last season because of his ability to run block.
There you go.
He was a better run block than Trayshawn Holden, even though he's got Trayshawn probably has, he's 30 pounds heavier than him, most likely.
Yeah.
Like Trayshawn's a big boy, and I think they're going to need him in the Big Ten a lot. I think there's a part of me that thinks Oregon's offense will look different because of the Big Ten, but maybe they try to outplay them like Chip Kelly did back in the day, where this is so different than what they've seen in years before that they keep the same. Part of me also thinks that they will change their offense because it has to. They're just going to be playing a completely different type of football. That's when Trayshawn Holden becomes a potential big member to this offense, because he's ginormous. And the best cornerbacks, the best nickels, the best safeties will all have their eyes towards Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson. And when you have a guy who's giant, like Trayshawn Holden, who's 6'2", 6'3", 210, 215, 20 pounds, and he can go up and high point a ball, honestly, with the best of them, when we've seen him do it, you would like to take advantage of that compared to what Gary Bryant can provide you. But as of now, again, we're not coaches. We're not Will Stein. We're not Junior Adams. Like, I think it is very fair for you to put Gary Bryant down as a starting Z, because that's what he did all of last season. And maybe that'll change. Maybe it'll be Trayshawn Holden from the jump, and Gary Bryant will come in as the Trayshawn Holden role from last season. But regardless, we're going to see a lot of dudes out there on the field. You just can't have the four guys like it was last season. There's just too many good players now.
Okay, so if we're saying the four guys that are more the veteran guys, which are the three returners, Tez, Gary, and Trayshawn, and then Evan are locks, which I think is the case. Like, let's. I know what we said is we're not coaches, we're not Junior Adams. Those guys are way smarter about football than we ever will be. There's no question about it, and they're paid way more than we are for a reason too. Way more. I don't even want to think about it.
A lot.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Just my head's going, oh man, what a life.
What a life.
How do you fill this out? Like, Jurion got hurt, or kind of like he got hurt, like he rolled an ankle, I think. Kyler
pulled a hammy.
I thought it was Trayshawn who had the hammy and Jurion had the ankle.
Oh, Jurion. Sorry, I thought you said Trayshawn.
Yeah.
No.
I was just talking. And then Kyler has probably, Chris Hudson last year joked about how many missed touchdown opportunities. It's not as many for Kyler, but every big play he has is like his foot's out of bounds in the end zone, or like he drops it, or a guy makes an incredible play. Like, he had a couple of touchdown opportunities last year. He had I was like right in front of it by the end zone in the spring game. It looked like it could have been live, a touchdown. And then I think on replay, pretty clearly, he didn't quite get it in. It was like a bang, bang play. Like, I really like both those guys. I also wonder if, like, does Jeremiah McClellan or Justice Lowe kind of enter the conversation here? And, like, I don't know, if like you were to pick two more guys, like assuming it's a 6-man rotation, the four guys we talked about are in, who are your last two? Is it just the two guys I mentioned, Jurion and Kyler, or would you maybe put somebody else in there?
I think those guys have to be the leaders in the clubhouse, Jurion and Kyler, just because this will be Kyler's third, Jurion's second. They should theoretically get the offense more than other people. Justice Lowe, it's kind of similar idea, who, Tez Johnson said he was the third best, whatever that means.
I don't know what that means, to be honest.
I
think he might have just been gassing his friend up. I can't imagine that's true, because we talked about the other three guys. There's a lot of
talent
guys
on the team. Yeah. So if it's up to me, it's probably Jurion and Kyler. Again, we don't watch practices, so we don't actually see if Justice Lowe is the third best receiver on the team. What kind of worries me about Jurion every once in a while is it just doesn't seem like he has the quick elite burst in the middle of the field. And he's a big dude, don't get me wrong. So I don't expect him to look like Tez Johnson out there, but it's just something about it. Every time I've seen him kind of play, he just feel a little like stuck in the mud in the middle of the field. And maybe that's lack of playing time, and maybe that's just not knowing, like second guessing himself or something more than that. But that's the only thing. But it's got to be Kyler. It's got to be Jurion, because those guys just have the most potential, and I feel like are the most hype that we have heard about, and just kind of fall in line too. Because you have I wouldn't say you need another slot receiver to step up, because like Tez Johnson and Gary Bryant play the slot. Trayshawn Holden actually played the slot a fair amount last season as well. So I would want to see just an outside guy. Like if Evan Stewart, if he does have injury problems, which he's had for his career in college, who's going to be that X receiver? Like that's the biggest question mark, at least in my mind, as the guys who are like who's the 5, 6, 7, 8 in the rotation. But there are some options. I'd like to see one of them actually step up.
Last thought on, and it's a Jurion thought, and then we can move over to tight end. When the comp is AJ Brown or Deebo Samuel, who are both very dynamic for being, again, the comp is because they're all like 6'2", 6'3", 210, 220 pound guys. I agree. I haven't seen that acceleration. And in fact, the play he got hurt on was a screen, which was not blocked well at all for him. So I don't blame him for taking the loss and whatnot. But you're right. He had a couple of yards to accelerate, and it might have been indecision. It might have been the fact that he had nowhere to go, and so he wasn't able to hit the gas. But it just wasn't quite there. And I was hoping to see a little bit more out of him. So we'll see. I don't know. I don't want to. I feel like everybody gets down on him because he gets hurt and stuff, and then you don't get to see it. And there's been so few opportunities. I'm one of those guys who's just like really excited to go watch him, and I'm kind of bummed. I'm kind of bummed we just didn't get like more. Oh man, here's the Jurion Dickey, breakout day. So
right, and at the end of the day, it's all just the spring game.
So, right, exactly. Yeah.
All that really matters is the regular season. All right, we're through one pass catching group. We got another one coming up, and then the ones who are protecting the pass throwers. We'll get to that after the break. All right. Welcome back to the Odds and Audibles podcast. Thank you for enjoying our ads that we put into the podcast just for you. We're going to move on. We just finished with the wide receivers. We are going to now talk about the tight ends. Not sure there's a whole lot to talk about here, as Oregon returns their top 2 tight ends from a season ago in Terrence Ferguson and Patrick Herbert. 2 very important parts of their offenses. And a guy like Terrence Ferguson had the chance to go pro and elected to come back to Oregon for his 4th and final season with the Ducks. So, Erik, anything else to the group?
My depth chart is Terrence Ferguson and Patrick Herbert.
All right.
But we have more. There are more things, I swear.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's not just that simple. They have other players. I think Kenyon Sadiq was really fun to watch. He literally played running back. They handed him the ball as a ball carrier. He played fullback when they went to their big personnel package. He played tight end. Obviously, that's his position. And then they lined him out wide, and he played outside. And I just think this is the guy who could play every position on offense besides quarterback and offensive line. And I think his versatility and the I guess opportunities it provides Will to get creative are like really exciting. And
right.
We know the kind of athlete he is. We know he's added. I want to know the weights, because I think he's probably up 5 to 10 pounds at least. Like he's bulked up. And this is a guy he came in pretty yoked up too.
We asked him. I just don't remember what he said.
There's so many. I know it's too long ago in our brains. There's so many interviews. But I didn't include him here just because I think it's pretty clear the 2 vets are the guys. Yeah. But the other part is like he almost doesn't play the same position as those 2 guys. Like I think I don't know if you'll ever see him on the field as the only tight end. I think you're going to see him on the field when they go to 12 or when they go to those jumbo packages, or like when they literally just split him out as a receiver or he's playing running back. So it's almost like he's almost like not a tight end, while also that's the position he's listed at. So I didn't really know exactly where to fit him. Like if I just had like a offensive playmaker position, I just put him there and there'd be no one behind him. I just don't know exactly what to do with him. I think he's going to play a lot more than he played last year, and I think there are going to be games where, like, I'm not going to be surprised at all where if he has a couple of games where he has like a 60-yard touchdown off of 3 to 4 different possible options for how that happens. So really high on him. Think he's somebody that the staff is really excited about. I just remember Will Stein, I think in his March interview, just talking about like, oh, Kenyon, this guy, he's coming. Things are happening. So really fired up about that. I have no idea what happens after, like in terms of who their 4th tight end is. In fact, I'm going to throw a curveball at you, Jared. Do you buy like maybe Travis Brashear being somebody who sees the field more than we expect? Because he's like big and athletic and he kind of moves a little bit. I don't know. Because the other 2 guys are basically both high school receivers that are, Pugliano's not as much, but he was hurt all spring. But Saliapago is basically a receiver that's now being the same thing with Sadiq, basically going from playing receiver in high school to playing inline this year. So Brashear is like 6'6", 265. He's a monster guy. I could see him being out there a little bit more than people think. But if there's a concern at tight end, it's just the fact that there's like, I think 3 known guys, and then I don't quite know. And they'd like to play a 4th guy if they can.
Yeah, I mean, that was my driving force a season ago. And then when they landed Casey Kelly, not around this time, but around like when the spring game was a season ago. I'm not sure if they do that again. I'm not sure how they've landed a couple guys with the scholarship totals, but that's neither here nor there. I don't have a lot here. Terrence Ferguson and Patrick Herbert are very obviously the top 2 tight ends. Ferguson's a really good overall tight end, exactly what you want. Big guy, can block, can catch a ball, athletic, makes the run after the catch, hard to take down. He's a very prototypical Big Ten, Pac-12 tight end, and I think that's great. And Patrick Herbert is somebody who's really grown into the type of player that people thought he was going to be coming out of high school. Maybe not the same athlete that he once was, but again, another guy who, when called upon, can do everything that Terrence Ferguson does. Maybe not as great, and maybe it's a little clunky, but he can do everything that Terrence Ferguson can do, and it's a wonderful backup tight end. And then Kenyon Sadiq is just the ginormous Devo Samuel to Oregon this year. He, like you went through, he can just do anything, and it's just exciting. I don't know what he's going to do, and maybe Kenyon Sadiq is the backup X receiver.
Maybe he's the starting Z.
I'm okay with that. I think he might be, we ask all the time to kids on the team where it's like, oh, who's the fastest guy? And the most athletic guy on the team might be Kenyon Sadiq. Just because of what he can do on the football field that nobody else can.
I feel like him and Devin Jackson are the 2 guys everybody on the team is just enamored with physically.
Yeah, and when everybody has a clear answer to those questions, you gotta sit down and listen. Yeah. Okay, these are all freak athletes in their own right, depending on, or not depending on what position they play. They're all freaks. And they're like, yeah, that guy, he is the freakiest of the freak athletes on this field. So just something to point out, kind of listen to. But yeah, tight end, Oregon probably feels pretty good going into the season with that one. So we'll move to the offensive line where there are some question marks. I'm not going to put it, last year there were not a lot of question marks going into the season. But they had a really good idea. They had names to positions that could happen. It seems like there was, for a guy like Josh Connerly, for example, it seemed like that was the natural progression to the next level where he would be the starting left tackle rather than the backup left tackle. So some changes, some new faces, new additions, maybe some still new additions that are coming through, but who knows? Regardless, I think this is a talented group.
I feel awesome about the first line on my depth chart. Once we get past this, I get a little bit weary, and maybe I'm overstating it because there's some injuries that forced a couple of guys not to play, and there are a couple of true freshmen who people are really high on that are coming in. I don't expect true freshmen on the offensive line really ever to play unless you're like Josh Connerly or JPJ or I guess Poncho last year. So maybe there's room for it, but it's maybe a guy a year. And if there's a guy on this year's team, it's probably going to be Shaq McRoy because he's 6'8",
enormous,
300 and whatever pounds. But I think the starting five is really exciting. Josh Carnley Jr. and Johnny Cornelius as the tackles are going to be two of the most athletic tackles. We saw it last year, but in the Big Ten, probably I still would contend, and I said it last year, the two most athletic tackles Oregon's ever had together at the same time. I mean, these are both guys who could be first or second round draft picks next year. I think there's that kind of a ceiling. Just physically, athletically. I think Josh has really come a long way as a run blocker. At least that's something he wanted to do this offseason. And in the spring game, there were some nice moments. Feel really good about Marcus Harper being your left guard. I think Marcus kind of gets a bad rap there's always just like one offensive lineman the fan base decides stinks. And like it was Stephen Jones a couple of years ago. It felt like it was Marcus Harper last year. I don't get it. I think he's a more than serviceable starting interior lineman. I think he's a really good veteran presence. I feel good about him as your left guard. I feel good about Matthew Bedford as your right guard coming in from Indiana. I thought he had a really nice spring game. And then Poncho at center maybe wasn't quite the spring game you wanted. There's a couple of snap issues. That offensive line notably was the one that had some issues with maybe communication. Like that left side seemed to be lost at times. And some of that could be those players' fault, but it could also be maybe the center maybe not doing a great job, or even Dylan maybe not doing a great job of communicating and getting everything set up pre-snap. But I didn't think it was like a home run Iapani Lalalu spring game. I still think he's clearly your center. If those are your five guys, you've got a really athletic, rugged, big, strong group that I think is going to be really, really good, obviously, in pass situations. I think still pretty darn good against as in terms of run blocking. I think that five is awesome. I just think afterwards, I've got questions. I've got some concerns with Ope, Poncho's older brother, retiring. George Silva seems to be the backup left tackle. He had a really rough spring game. He's a senior. You kind of were hoping they'd turn the corner. Again, it's one data point. I don't want to make too much out of it, but I wasn't like jumping for joy with what I saw. Dave Iuli was notably out, and I think, if there's going to be a sixth guy, he's maybe the lead candidate for that, just based upon what we've seen and know about him. I've talked to people who think he's got a really high ceiling, and he's out right now, I think, with a foot injury. I don't know what that's going to do for his season, but that injury to me is kind of a big deal. I've got Silva. I'll just run through the two deep, I guess, on the second string here. I've got George Silva at left tackle. I've got Iuli, and then I included Janoris Wilson because he started as one of the left guards. Just because I don't know what's going on with Iuli. Center, I've got Harper or Charlie Pickard. Charlie, walk-on kid from up in Portland, notably was the other starting center in the spring game for the White offense. Nishad Strother, I've got at right guard. I think that's a player you feel pretty decent about just because he's been a starter before. And I've got Kavika Rogers as the backup right tackle. And I actually have heard some really good things about Kavika.
I think Kavika's pretty good.
I think Kavika's going to be a guy, and I kind of think he's probably your starting right tackle in 25 unless some of these younger guys just like maybe Shaq McRoy pushes his way past him, or maybe Shaq McRoy's your left tackle. But like I think Kavika's a starting caliber player. So like I probably feel a little better about the tackles than I do about some of the depth on the inside. And maybe that doesn't matter because offensive line, hopefully you don't play more than 6 or 7 guys really at all for a season. And maybe the fact that they only have 6 or 7 guys, they're set. But I came away from the spring game just a little bit more concerned about the depth. And part of that was, again, I think that green left side of the line was just roasted for a half.
Yeah, they struggled.
But I don't know, Jared, does that seem reasonable to have those concerns or any, I guess, thoughts on this line that I didn't touch on?
Well, the spring game is always tough because it's not the starting offensive line.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that chemistry is important, and they don't have it with those guys. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. I don't think I ever realized how important it was until I started covering the beat, and it was there, every day. And you talk to the offensive line, and they're all like, and every last one of them says how important that is. The coaching staff says how important it is, and then you really get to see it because I forgot who it was. I think it was Marcus Harper last year talked about. Just like the only thing he does is he looks at Jackson Powers Johnson, the center, when he snaps the ball, and everything else is just like unspoken because it's so loud in whatever opposing stadium they're in, and that's important. So that's where the chemistry comes into balance. And So I get it. There were some not great moments for George Silva, and there was one or two from Josh Connor that weren't great. The other time, it's like, oh, they're going against a really good defensive line.
Yep.
Like, could happen to a lot of teams. But I think the starting five, I think the Matthew Bedford edition is still criminally underrated. He still is ranked as a tackle in the 24/7 transfer portal rankings. He's not a tackle. He hasn't played tackle in 2 years. He's a guard. He's a Big Ten guard. He is a run block dominant guard that Oregon has not had in their offensive line group the last couple of seasons. Even though Stephen Jones was good at it, he wasn't great. Marcus Harper is good at it. He's not great at run blocking. Matthew Bedford's a good run blocker, and they need that a lot. Poncho, the snap thing is always going to be a story.
Mm-hmm.
It was a preseason story with Jackson Powers-Johnson last year. It's a story with every center across the country if they start having the yips. Not the yips, but if they make a mistake here or there.
And Poncho kind of made it a story because he brought it up as his biggest concern about playing center too.
Yeah,
just to put that out there.
It was a story with Jake Hansen, even though he was a fantastic center. Doesn't matter. They make a mistake. That's always going to be the story. But still, I think he's a great player. I think he'll be just fine. I think the tackle combination of Connerly and Cornelius is wonderful. I think it's one of the best tackle combinations in the country. Maybe second only to LSU, who's probably going to have like the two first tackles taken off the board next year. Great group. And I think the depth is fine. I think no Dave Iuli during the spring kind of hurt just to see what it would be like. But I think Strother's a really good backup. I think Kavika Rogers is a really good backup. I like Janoris Wilson. I think he's a good player, but maybe he gets it, maybe he doesn't with Dave Iuli being hurt. The backup left tackle spot is a little concerning.
Yeah.
Unless Kavika can play left. But as we've talked to plenty of players, playing left tackle does not mean you could play right, and playing right tackle does not mean you could play left. And we'll see. But if Connerly goes down or if a tackle goes down, that's where you kind of get worried. But we'll see. Maybe there's a freshman who comes up and shows that they're worth it like they were, or like Ayapani Lalalu was last season. But I think the unit overall, good.
Maybe the best case is just Shaq is really awesome right away, and they can use him at either tackle spot. He was working at right, I believe, all spring and in the spring game, so that seems to be where they're starting him. But you can't teach that size, and frankly, you can't teach that athleticism. I mean, we talked about some of those defensive line guys and just the way they get off the ball. Like, I still love Shaq. We talked about Shaq McBroy's high school film was my favorite in last year's class, just because you just never see people this big just engulf people so quickly and just it's over. Like, basically he gets off the line, and this is high school football in Alabama, mind you. But there's some upside there that's really intriguing, but who knows? An offensive lineman, I think, is the hardest to predict typically in terms of who's going to be awesome right away. Because no one thought Poncho was going to be a guy who played really at all last year. And then he was playing 25 snaps a game and started as center in the bowl game.
Yeah,
so
it was weird.
Maybe Fox Crater, maybe Devin Brooks, the guys who haven't enrolled, one of those guys comes in and is able to contribute. I'm kind of skeptical, but they could probably use some tackle help. And as you said, Jared, maybe they find a way to add a tackle in the portal. I have no idea how they do it. I don't know where the scholarships come from, but these guys are creative, and Marshall Malco, we trust in you to find the guys.
That's why they get paid the big bucks. They figure it out. And maybe they do, maybe they don't, but I still think the offensive line as a whole is a good group. I think that there's a lot of talent there. I think, heading into the Big Ten, the offensive line was a big question mark last season. I don't think it's a question mark this year at all. I think Poncho, I still think that he's great. I still think he's a really good center. And I know like the snapping thing in the spring game, one of them looked like a missed call or just like weren't on the same page together with Dylan Gabriel. The other one wasn't great, but that stuff happens. Like, I'm not going to say there's big question marks at center with Oregon going forward. It's like, no, I think Poncho's a really good center and a really good offensive lineman, and he's learning a new position, but knowing how hard he worked all last season to become a contributing member of the of the offensive line. Like, I don't see why he's not going to try to do that and get his snaps down and get his placement down and all those other things. So I'm fully confident in the offensive line moving forward.
That's a good thing on Poncho. We know he can grow and improve quickly. He's got a full offseason to grow into a center position. I think he'll do it. I'm not worried about him. I hope that isn't what people think coming away. I just thought there were a couple moments that weren't awesome from the spring game.
Yeah, and that stuff happens.
Yeah.
Well,
I wanted to do the ranking. I wanted to do the ranking thing.
Correct. I apologize. Bad host.
No, it's okay.
Bad host.
We didn't discuss it pre-show. That was my fault. I didn't bring up that I wanted to do that.
So, and if you're a listener and you missed the last episode, I ranked the defensive position groups, just ranked them and how good they are. Who's the best? Who's the worst, quote unquote? And like Erik and I talked about the last podcast, there are not a lot of position groups where you don't feel pretty good about who's going to be stepping on the field, at least as the starting unit for the Oregon Ducks in 2024 in the Big Ten. So without further ado, Erik, what are your position rankings?
I think quarterback has to be first, just because we talked about it, and it's the most important. And if you've got a quarterback room like this, you feel awesome about an offense. I think receiver might be second. I think running back and receiver is really tough. Like those are, I would group those two on a tier together. And I think I might lean receiver just because I think they have maybe almost more depth there, which feels kind of wild considering we think there's like a legitimate three-headed monster at running back. So I'd go, I think, quarterback, receiver, running back. And then I think I'd go O-line, which would maybe catch some people off guard because we had I had some concerns there. I just think that I don't have really any concerns about the starting five. And I think the starting five has like 2 or 3 guys who could be all Big Ten players. And I think they're going to be really good. And then I just go tight end at the end because I do think there's 2 guys who I know are going to be really good traditional tight ends. They've got the Swiss Army knife with Sadiq. But after that, like the fact that I'm suggesting maybe a walk-on is maybe their 4th guy is probably a sign of maybe some things to be concerned of. So that would be my order, with the acknowledgement that I think receiver and running back is like almost a tie. I just maybe prefer kind of the proven production of Tez, the proven production of Evan, and the kind of the returners, whereas Jordan is stepping into a role that he has really never played at this level. And you've got Jay, who you're relying on, who was just playing D2 football last fall. So that would be my order.
I think that's very fair. I would have it the same way. I would just have running back ahead of wide receiver. I just think strictly because I think the ceiling of wide receiver is probably higher if Evan Stewart hits, but I think the floor for running back is higher. Just because I think Whittington and James are. I know that Jordan has been a starter. I don't see how he's not just an absolute monster. Yeah, he was 7 yards a game last year, or 7 yards a carry last year.
Yeah,
like, and he had a ton of carries. Like, don't get me wrong. And I just think he's going to be a monster. I really like Noah Whittington. Again, I'm assuming that he'll be at like 100% for the fall. And then Jay Harris, I just think he's going to be what Jordan James was his first year, just a 3rd down, 4th down, goal line running back. And at 6'2", 220, that sounds okay to me.
Yeah, sign me up for those guys.
Yeah. Well, that'll do it. Another episode of the Odds and Audibles podcast is over. Thank you for spending the last hour. I mean, if you're still here, God bless you. Thank you for spending the last hour with us. We'll be back, I don't know, sometime later this week, I'm sure. Who knows? It's May. I'll be in Scottsdale next week, so we'll all see. But thank you again for listening. For Erik Skopil, I'm Jared Mack. This has been the latest episode of the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.